Good morning. It's I think we are starting 5 minutes late, and this is going to be a very exciting panel because I know all three are very excellent speakers. It's very, it's not pleasant to come, to EAI on Saturday morning, but it'll be worthwhile because these experts are obviously very great speakers. So without further ado, let me invite Professor Chun first.
Thank you. For the opening remarks, let me talk about how we, as a South Korean scholar, interpret Trump's foreign policy, how Trump's foreign policy will impact on the security strategy of South Korea in this region. So I think the most critical question or aspect of interpreting Trump's American first policy is whether the United States continues to maintain global leadership or its hegemonic strategy. At present, there is no evidence to suggest that the United States is pursuing its interest merely as a normal great power, giving up its status as hegemonic power. Such a claim cannot be made as of now. On the contrary, the core of Trump's foreign policy can be characterized as a illiberal hegemonic strategy. For me, that's a personal interpretation. However, there is a structural aspect of the change of Trump's foreign policy. Trumpism. Trumpism is not really an ism, it's an incoherent collection of many ideas and issues, policies, but we can merely say it's some kind of paradigm of President Trump's new foreign policy. We can say it's a reflection of Trump's personal tactical inclination, but also represents a broader structural trend among the American public, as evidenced by the recent election. Over the past 30 years of the post-Cold War era, the American people have experienced enormous difficulties in the burdens of unilateral hegemony, which is ironical. You know, the citizen of the most powerful country has suffered from many incidents such as 9/11, economic recession, and COVID crisis, and millions of Americans died as a citizen of the most powerful country in the human history. They have faced burdens and responsibilities that come with being the world's most powerful nation, including the challenges of bearing global responsibilities and enduring hardships as the foremost global power. Within this context, Trump's foreign policy can be interpreted through the following three perspectives. First, as an intermittent unilateral strategy to consolidate national power. Second, as a shift from benevolent to coercive hegemony. And third, as a potential reorientation toward being just a normal great power. So first, Trumpism can be interpreted as an intermittent unilateral foreign policy strategy for the United States, which is not unique. We have witnessed many incidents, this kind of things before. It is in fact a recurring pattern that has intermittently appeared through the history of U.S. hegemonic foreign policy. For example, the strategy of President Nixon in the early 1970s and President Reagan in the mid-1980s demonstrated unilateral shifts aiming at consolidating U.S. national power by extracting economic concessions from allies based on the public goods of security provided by the United States and readjusting the framework of these traditional multilateral policies. Also, liberal rules-based order is often described as the one grounded in multilateral consensus. It necessarily requires global leadership. Thus, the United States as a hegemonic power has often needed intermittent unilateralism to sustain its power. After experiencing 30 years of post-Cold War unipolar system, the U.S. power depletion has reached a critical point. So while the U.S. continues to sustain its economic system through the dollar's role as a global reserve currency and by financing trade and fiscal deficits, should its power decline further and the dollar's credibility erode, the current hegemonic system would become unsustainable. Given this, President Trump's diplomacy can be interpreted as exhibiting this kind of tendencies aimed at rebuilding U.S. power. And it also resembles President Biden's the policy. So they want to rebuild the United States as a hegemonic power again after the short-term intermittent kind of unilateralism, showing some coercive tendencies toward its allies and the adversaries. So the slogan, "Make America Great Again," can be viewed as a recurring pattern of this intermittent unilateralism aimed at restoring U.S. hegemony. The second, which is different and unique, another interpretation sees Trumpism as a fundamental shift from a benevolent hegemony to a coercive one. I think this is the first in the history after the Second World War. U.S. has never entirely deviated from its hegemonic framework as a benevolent hegemony. Its immense national power has allowed it to voluntarily provide global public goods essential for the international community. These include maintaining multilateral secure systems, open liberal economic order, and all these things. Now, a coercive hegemony maintains all these orders through sheer power. Despite shifts toward intermittent unilateralism, the U.S. has voluntarily provided security frameworks through alliances, eliciting economic consensus in return. However, now, if the U.S. starts coercing its allies for economic contributions while maintaining its security commitments, the cost borne by allies will rise dramatically compared to the benefits. In such scenarios, allies would calculate the costs not against the benefits provided the U.S., but against the cost of losing these benefits entirely. Third, this is last, Trumpism could be mistaken as a strategy reflecting U.S. reorientation toward being a normal great power. We don't know yet. If Trumpism represents an abandonment of a hegemonic strategy, this has profound implications for the international order. Even coercive hegemony involves maintaining the existing order and fundamental framework established by the U.S., all those things. But if the U.S. relinquishes its hegemonic framework and adjusts its foreign policy as a normal great power, the international system's fundamental pillars would collapse. The dollar-based system, nuclear non-proliferation, all these multilateral environments, even as a significantly stronger power than other great powers, abandoning a hegemonic strategy would fundamentally alter global dynamics, as Chairman Ha said, the lack of global leadership. The restraint tendency shown in Trumpist foreign policy is clear, retreating from regions where core interests are not at stake and selectively intervening in regions with vital interests, the hallmarks of Trumpist strategy. However, it remains unclear as of now whether this restraint is rooted in a hegemonic strategy or represents a retreat to a normal great power strategy. So, in conclusion, whether Trumpism combines elements of realist restraint, conservatism, nationalism, all these remain ambiguous. Thank you.
I think there was I needed some guidance because I thought each speaker speak 8 or 10 minutes and I'm just leading the round discussion, right? But I asked each speaker to deliver 8 minutes and then I will continue 2 rounds of discussion. Already Professor Chun has answered pretty much of my first round discussions, but I will ask more specific questions. So let's just continue to hear what 2 other speakers will talk. So let me invite Professor Jimbo.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to begin by thanking East Asian Institute for organizing this great symposium. And very pleased to be back in Seoul to get together with so many talented people here. And then it is another honor to be here today to discuss a topic of profound importance for Japan, Korea, Australia, key like-minded states in the Indo-Pacific region, on how we navigate geopolitics in Indo-Pacific, especially after President-elect Donald Trump returns to the White House, which will happen next Monday. And today I'd like to address two key questions. First, how will Trump 2.0 likely to shape the Indo-Pacific, which was already outlined quite well by the Professor Chun, so I'll be quick in dealing with that. And the second, and what strategic, I would say, challenges or dilemmas that those three countries may face. And after finally, and how can Japan, Korea, and Australia, together with partners in this region, chart the path towards this uncertain period of time. As already laid out by the Professor Chun, I think emerging American ideology, so to say, most effectively represented by Trump since the Trump 1.0, as we know, is not merely his personal approach to the U.S. governance, but it is the broader recalibration of the U.S. Foreign policy. And I think the emphasis on the America first, or make America great again, translated into the more transactional policy to the alliance and partnership approaches. And that leads to the reduced appetite for the multilateralism and to focus on the burden sharing that often comes with the coercive languages. And Ambassador mentioned about the confirmation hearing of the Marco Rubio, and I also listened very carefully, and which is Ambassador mentioned about much more, I think, at re-ensuring approaches on the alliance and their engagement in the region, which is also really reassuring in the sense that the United States remained to engage in the region. But again, at the outset, he also mentioned about the America First policy, which has also been cited as a notion of the delusion in maintaining the global order at the expense of American interests, and which many rising states or so-called free riders can take advantage, which would be eroding of the American power. And I think this is the particular notion that those Trump team and the foreign policy team will share in the upcoming administration, whatever the result in the detail. And I think we have to take note that this is the fundamental notion that the United States foreign policy team is sharing. And for Japan and US allies, this resurgence raises some potential concerns. And first of all, the reliability of the U.S. Security guarantees cannot be seen as an autopilot from its past. And I always describe it as a subscription policy. We'll provide the nice contents, but you have to pay the fair share. And this is the, I think, particularly being seen already in the first Trump administration, but I think it will be accelerated in the second Trump administration. And I think that this transaction may create, I would say, unintended power vacuum that could potentially embolden some of those adversaries' assertiveness in this region. And this also have to be closely looked in a sense of what kind of commitments, political will, capability, and the physical presence may affect in the particular context of the creating deterrence and response relationship, especially in the Western Pacific, but also in beyond. And the third, the cohesion among the U.S. allies are already taking place in various shapes and forms, which is great news that we have, cultivated in the past several years. However, we also must look into how it could be well sustained and develop in the new configuration of the leaderships that we have, so that I have lots of optimisms, but also with some kind of cautiousness in how we can really recreate the regional order under the new era. And in short, I think that the Trump 2.0 accelerated the trends we have already observed in the first Trump administration, but I think that this will also be highlighted as the case that we need to take notes. And for Japan, I think that this presents a particularly complex sets of dilemmas. And let me begin with security. Japan's defense strategy remains heavily reliant on the U.S.-Japan alliance as a key cornerstone and pivotal place in our defense policy orientations, yet doubts about the extended deterrence, especially in light of the North Korea's missile nuclear capability advancements, and also with the China's militarization in the East and South China Sea, and all the capabilities are rapidly growing. Economically, Japan faces the dual pressures, which will be discussed in the second round. But on the one hand, U.S.-China decoupling impacts global supply chains, creating vulnerabilities for our export-driven economy. On the other, the U.S. So-called protectionist trends, tendencies, I would say, the risk undermining of the multilateral trade frameworks that Japan has worked on hard to sustain. So that I think we are deeply tied with the United States, yet increasingly aware of the need to diversify its partnership and capabilities to, I think, sustain the net result of the stability in the region. So what could I think Japan and Korea, Australia together envision for the Indo-Pacific order in coming years. And I think I can think of 2 or 3 key pillars that we need to pursue. First, for Japanese case, that will continue to invest on the, especially on the defense capabilities. And with a commitment of the rising defense spending to the 2% of the GDP by 2027, which might not happen because of the so many contexts involved, but I think we are aiming for it. And Japan is on the path of the strengthening of the Japanese self-defense capability, including those counter-strike options, and that will ensure our own capability for the flexible, I think, escalation control capability by our own, and also to contribute to the further integration operation with the U.S. forces through the kind of reintegrating our command and control system between the two forces. And the second, regional cooperation seems to be very crucial. Japan has already been in the position to promote the minilateral approaches such as Quad and our appetite in the joining the AUKUS Pillar 2 framework, and also with the emerging minilateralism take place with Korea, Australia, and also the ASEAN member states, and also our engagement in the Europe through NATO and other frameworks very much remains to be very important for today. And the third, on the context on the economic front, and Japan, I think, must read the maintaining rule-based international order, and as the promotion of the CPTPP, even after the Trump declared the withdrawal from the TPP, remain as that I think that exemplifies the importance that where the rule-based order seems to be have been withdrawn from the United States as a form of the TPP, but the TPP standards may exist through having such kind of CPTPP 11 framework that we are now actually being cultivated. So as I think that I'll conclude by the mentioning of the challenge for the implementing those strategies. And domestically, I think Japan faces political and fiscal constraints in sustaining increased defense spending and also our active contribution by ourselves. But achieving bipartisan support for the independent foreign policy also requires skillful leadership, and especially at the time that our government is now facing so-called the weak support from the ruling party that always require the major concession between the ruling parties and also the opposition parties. And regionally, balancing relation with China while hedging against the security risks is also a delicate task for all three members. Moreover, coordinating effectively with Korea and Australia requires a constant effort amid the political uncertainty that each country is now facing. So looking forward, I may propose a couple of things, and I think institutionalizing our three, I think coordinating partners is very important. I wouldn't really emphasize without America, but we always requires America's engagement, but we also have to prepare even without the United States. That kind of, I think, notion is particularly important at this point, and I think at this conference exemplifies its importance. Thank you very much.
Professor Jimbo. Let me invite Professor Wilkinson. You have about 8 minutes.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. So first of all, I'd just like to extend my thanks to the EAI for the kind invitation to speak here today on this very timely panel, alongside my good colleagues Ken and Chaesung, and of course moderator Suk-Jong Lee. So as the final speaker in the panel, I have the inevitable but unenviable challenge of trying to say something new and something different from what my esteemed colleagues have already articulated. I'll certainly try and do my best. So I will, rather than focus on what Trump means for Australia and for the region here, I'll withhold those marks until the first discussion round. So I have something to say on that, but I'll save those for later. So in fact, in my 10 minutes of remarks, I shall put Australia first. So I want to talk just a little bit about the sort of the how Australia's position in the region and various policy perspectives. Of course, Ambassador Robinson has already provided a superb tour d'horizon of this, but I'll see what I can add, particularly from a more focused security perspective. What can Australia bring to the table? What's motivating it to come to the table in this trilateral format? And then I'll end up sharing some thoughts that build a little bit upon Ken's on the nature of trilateralism, what we might do. So first, I think to understand, why Australia would be interested in trilateralism as, partially at least a safeguard to Trumpism, is to understand the challenges that Australia faces in the region. I mean, Canberra shares a deep concern with Seoul and Tokyo about a deteriorating security environment in the Indo-Pacific and globally. That's a given. And just to quote briefly from our 2024 National Defence Strategy, Australia faces the most complex and challenging strategic environment since the Second World War. Those are quite sobering words, I think, and that assessment, I think, is largely shared in Seoul and Tokyo as well. So, we really are kind of motivated to, to step up to the plate and see what we can do to respond to these challenges. As you know, there are so many regional flashpoints in the Indo-Pacific, and as Ambassador Robinson and other of the previous diplomats have mentioned, the need to uphold a rules-based order or a liberal international order is absolutely fundamental to Australia's approach, and this exists within the context of strategic competition, US-China rivalry at its heart. So like Korea and Japan, Australia is a US treaty ally, and I think together these three countries, with no disrespect to the other two spokes, are really the heart of the hub and spoke system in terms of their strategic importance and the capability that they bring to the table. But strategic competition is a full spectrum contest, and it's going to tax our resources in Australia nationally and the other partners nationally across all of these multiple dimensions: military, economic, diplomatic, informational, ideological. And so it makes absolute sense to partner up and to pool our resources in the face of such steep challenges. Now, if that situation wasn't bad enough, we're also facing an added cross-regional dimension to these challenges. So I've been involved a lot in the US looking at cross-regional challenges in terms of the cooperation between Russia and China across regions with their no-limit strategic partnership. I've been following this for a long time. And, we can see little examples of this, like the deployment of North Korean troops on the Ukraine front. So, this kind of cross-regional codependence between the security complexes of the Euro-Atlantic and the Indo-Pacific is really starting to crystallize. So, I'd like to say in the discussion round a little bit about the NATO and the Indo-Pacific 4 partners, because of course all three of us plus New Zealand are also part of that process. Now let's have a look at just very quickly about how Australia is kind of responding to these challenges. And I think these responses, I'm a little less familiar with Korea, but certainly with Japan, are taking a similar tack. We've released a lot of strategic documents recently, not least our first ever national defence strategy. And one of the, if I may quote that again, one of the key responses is a whole of government and whole of nation approach to Australia's defence to meet these exigencies of strategic competition. We also have our national defence concept, which is designed to make Australia in itself a hard target, deterrence by denial, whilst projecting our power outwards in support of allies and partners. So we've got some very ambitious plans to upgrade our military capabilities and build a future integrated force in the future. I don't have time to go into those in detail, but this really is, almost revolutionary in terms of its scope, not least AUKUS, but also surface fleet additions and improvements to Army and Air Forces as well. But we still, even if we nationalise we mobilise our national resources to the fullest extent possible, we're not strong enough as a middle power by ourselves to fundamentally change the strategic balance. So we're still highly dependent on our alliance with the United States, which brings the US back in already, and we're strengthening this through things like the Force Posture Initiative in our northern territories, but we're also getting other partners involved in that. Japan, of course, is now increasingly integrating into that. But the other thing that Australia has done, if we're talking about the region without the US or something, is hedge a little bit by building robust strategic partnerships with other regional states, especially Japan, but also Korea. And there's a lot of momentum behind the bilateral relationship between Australia and Korea at the moment. Now, the virtue of building these strategic partnerships with like-minded partners is twofold. First, it gives us a bit of a chance to diversify away from the United States. Maybe we can do different things, in different formats with our middle power allies. But it also, at the same time, reinforces the edifice of the US alliance system because we can work better together. So let me end with my final topic, which is to now move us over to the subject of Australia, Korea, Japan trilateralism itself. So some aspects of this have already been mentioned, but I think there's really wide scope and prospects for collaboration that will be valuable between us, and I think we need to work more to leverage those. Of course, we have shared values and interests. We're like-minded partners. We often use the term middle powers as well to describe ourselves. I'm a little uncomfortable about an emphatic description of Japan as a middle power because it's a very, very strong country, a sort of a semi-great power. But those are for academic debates, and I've written and published a lot on middle power, so I know this is a very complex concept, but it's also a nice shorthand to describe sort of what we might say secondary states that are US allies and so forth. So we'll just use it lightly. These countries, we all share between the three of us typical kind of middle power behaviour, a commitment to multilateralism, coalition building, being good international citizens. So if we pool our resources, we can achieve more than we could either individually or bilaterally. That's the whole raison d'etre for this new format. I think one of the key things that's already been alluded to is even in the absence of the United States, commitment to upholding the rules-based order, there's still a lot we can do together, especially together when we multiply our resources. We can also do something towards maintaining a favourable balance of power. We'll all mobilise our military resources and our deterrence capabilities in that purpose as well. So that gets to the hard material edge. And I think it's already been mentioned, the scope of the different issue sets that we might work on, from economic development and resilience. I think that resilience is worth coming back to later. Regional deterrence, maritime security, but also perhaps less controversial or easier to expedite cooperation on non-traditional security issues, humanitarian assistance, climate change, some of these things. These are kind of low-hanging fruit that we could easily do. And anyway, we can obviously elaborate on those issues a little bit more in the Q&A. So the question is, towards the end, is how do we bring this about? How do we kind of, make this tangible rather than just dialogues and so forth? And one or two little mechanisms have been mentioned, which is reassuring. So how do we go about institutionalizing trilateral cooperation, either informally, ad hoc, or more formally? I mean, effectively, we're talking about a new minilateral here to add to the galaxy of minilaterals that we have within the region. This is a subject close to my heart, given that I've just finished writing a book manuscript on this, looking at AUKUS, Quad, and US, Japan, Australia trilateralism, which is something that I'm really focused on. So this is a new development, and I think it fits within that space. So we can, when we talk about the security institutions in the second round of discussion, we can perhaps come back to that. From my observations about how we might just tentatively go about this, the good thing is we all have strategic partnerships bilaterally or some variation thereof. Japan and Korea is perhaps not officially a strategic partnership, but it has many of the components of that, or many of the channels of communication that we have in our other strategic partnerships. So these are often the building blocks of effective minilaterals like the Quad, like the Global Combat Aircraft Program, for example. So that's a good sign. So is it a question of institutionalizing it through just sort of accretion of track 1 or track 1.5 dialogues? Is it a question of just basically coordinating along converging lines of national effort or bilateral effort and trilaterally branding these? Or do we want some kind of dedicated institutional forum that publishes a public agenda, like this is a real thing, we have a website and so forth, and has dedicated working groups and develop some functional capacity? So we'll have to see how that goes, but it's a very interesting question for further study. Just very, very lastly, there's obviously some challenges and obstacles to this, which maybe we'll get into in the discussion. But I think the key thing is, if there's the policy appetite, if there's the momentum, the focus, that we try and keep up the momentum of trilateralism. It makes perfect sense, and not let it fall into just sort of being a temporary or hollow gesture. I mean, for example, we had another example of minilateralism, MICTA, Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, Australia. Who talks about that now? And not many people. So at least I don't encounter it that much. Which, of course, MICTA is a very snappy name. And over dinner last night, we were trying to figure out, well, if we're going to make this stick, Australia, Japan, Korea trilateralism, what would we call it? So is it going to be Australia, Japan, Korea, AJK, JAK, Japan, Australia, Korea, or KAJ, Korea, Australia, Japan? That's a problem we should probably leave to the end. Anyway, I'll end my remarks here, and thanks for your kind attention. I look forward to the discussion rounds and Q&A sessions to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Wilkinson. Actually, EAI has played a very critical role, to this middle power diplomacy and also creation of a MICTA and so forth. Even though I know we wanted more than MICTA, but they became a kind of global loose network rather than more focused one. Okay, so let's start our discussion. Following the order of speaking, let me ask Professor Chun. According to Professor Chun, this Trump 2.0 is a kind of recycling a unilateral foreign policy, going back to Nixon and Reagan, and even maybe the first Bush administration. So there is an aspect of a structural aspect why there's a returning of this unilateralism in American foreign policy. And he has mentioned, I like this term, the illiberal hegemony. And illiberal hegemony, and we have to see whether the Trump administration will evolve to the normal, great power politics, or how he can shape this illiberal hegemony. So we'll see. While you are characterizing the Trump 2.0 administration, you don't have much time to talk about security in the region. And according to Professor Jimbo, he was concerned about power vacuum in the Pacific area because of this Trump's transitional approach to security affairs in the region. So then how do you perceive the South Koreans' position? Like we've been participating in Quad Plus, and also we've been quite active, but we have a domestic political challenge. And if new government comes in, it can be a government who is trying to take a different position. And also second is, of course, North Korea issues. How do you interpret the Trump administration will handle this, the nuclear issues posed by North Korea? Because we are talking a lot. They may admit North Korea as a nuclear state. So rather than CBID, they may go for the limited deal to cut the level of the missile and nuclear capacity. So I'd like to hear how does Trump 201 will affect Korea's national security, especially vis-a-vis North Korea.
Thank you. First, I want to address a question how sustainable President Trump's security policy during his term. He is a single-term president. And I heard the former security advisor John Bolton's interview, and he said that President Trump doesn't have any comprehensive security framework in his head. He can deal with some economic issues, but he doesn't have some blueprint, not just for East Asia, but globally. So we don't know how he will act to the security challenges in this region. But he probably wants to showcase some achievements in security matters, expecting the midterm. So he wants to do something. We don't know what it will be, probably Greenland, Panama Canal, all those things. But he wants to show to the public that he's achieving something in security policies before the midterm so that it can create the better political environments after the midterm. And I think there is incoherent differences inside Trump's administration between Trump himself and so-called mainstream Republican conservative internationalists. Recently, there was an article by Mitch McConnell, the longtime Republican leader, showing that he wants to reject the isolationist policy. He says we have to strengthen the alliance with East Asian partners, like all these countries. We have to back up these countries in security matters and increase military spending, all those things. So as time goes by, probably pressuring alliance by President Trump will be countered by these mainstream Republican leaders, which means that at some point they have to strengthen the alliance ties with these three countries and Philippines and Thailand to counter Chinese challenges or Russia's challenges even after the end of the Ukraine war, meaning that there will be pressure or requests upon the alliance partners in this region to pursue the policy of checking and balancing against China, not just about raising, the alliance burdens. So our South Korean government, after maybe election, we don't know when it will be, but if we have a new president, there will be a pressure from the Trump administration that we have to do something, contribute to the U.S. policy to counter China. So that will be a very challenging task from the states. I think we can deal with economic pressure from Trump administration in economic matters, but if there is a big decision that we have to make in security matters, then it requires a lot of consideration. And also, if Trump wants to achieve something in dealing with North Korea by concluding some negotiations with North Korea, avoiding or giving up the ultimate purpose of denuclearization, complete denuclearization of North Korea, then it will raise a lot of controversies in South Korea, and not just in South Korea, but in the region as a whole. Because it will, as Professor Jimbo said, if President Trump shows some signs of weakening extended deterrence to South Korea, it will increase a lot of controversies, not just in South Korea. So if he hurries to achieve something in dealing with North Korea, weakening the Washington consensus, the declaration, then South Korea will be in a position to think about some other options. First, maybe strengthening security ties with Japan and Australia and try to reviving the global and regional nuclear non-proliferation order. But if that doesn't work, maybe we have to talk with China, which contradicts the first task that we have to take. And then lastly, probably we can think about the option of going nuclear, which will raise a lot of controversies. So we have to talk to not just to President Trump, but also the leaders in the United States that there should be some coherent message to alliance partners in East Asia to secure the support of the alliance partners here and to maintain the global nuclear non-proliferation order.
Thank you very much, Professor. Let me move to Professor Ken Jimbo. You talked about, for us to get prepared for this potential power vacuum because of Trump 2.0. You mentioned diversification. So before we talked about diversification, let's talk about strengthening what we have achieved so far. So let's say already Professor Chun has mentioned the Camp David and the trilateral cooperation between US, Korea, and Japan. We talked about creating secretariat even, and even though President Biden has emphasized the next U.S. government should succeed this legacy, but we all doubt. Maybe he does, maybe Malarawa consensus rather than the Camp David declaration. Who knows? So, how do you perceive the future of this, trilateral? Before Australia, let me talk this one first. The U.S., Korea, Japan tripartite cooperation, especially this year, we are going to celebrate 60th anniversary of normalizing relations between Korea and Japan. So that's the one, how we can sustain this U.S., Korea, Japan tripartite cooperation. And then you mentioned about diversification of the regional security here, and you are talking about linking even to NATO and also some issues. But this one, I'm not sure because many Koreans, I'm not sure about Australians, majority of Koreans are still thinking maybe war in Ukraine, and also South Korea's proactivism President Yoon's approach to NATO is too early. So there is a kind of saying this linking transatlantic security with this Indo-Pacific security is a premature idea. So I'd like to hear about your opinion. And also, we appreciate when the Trump walked away from TPP, President Obama has created, and Japan did a wonderful job to strengthen institutionalize CPTPP. So that's trade area that will be discussed in the next panel. So in the security area, what kind of this minilateral network the Japan can lead and show your strengths? That's my question.
Thank you for two very important questions, and you have articulated very well on the issues that we face. On the issue of the power vacuum and how it has been tried to fill by the emerging minilateral cooperation in Asia, as we all know that Asia-Pacific security architecture predominantly been originated from the hub and spokes approaches, one by one security commitments by the United States, so that when current Prime Minister Ishiba mentioned about he envisions the Asian version of NATO in the future, I was one of the heaviest critics of that notion, because it doesn't really fit to the strategic context of the region. And I think we need to have a much more innovative approaches that is taking place. And I think one of the greatest achievement that we have in past 4 years, especially under the Biden administration, is that some of the missing links of those security cooperation has been filled, which created the new grounds for cooperation. One of the most significant has been the Japan-Korea relationship that really led the ground for wider Japan-US-Korea trilateral relationship. And interesting, the U.S. hub and spoke system had a very distinct, command and control system in the two alliances, but we share the same and common strategic interests, especially over Korean Peninsula, that we required us to have better intelligence cooperation, coordination for the strategic plannings, and how we can really coordinate our individual policy into the joint actions seems to be the enduring, I think, agenda that we need to promote it further. And that has also been taking place in Philippines as well. And when we try to reach out to Southeast Asia, I think Philippines has been a very important entrance point, especially towards the South China Sea. And I also, make a significant importance of the institutional cooperation with ASEAN as well, and so that I hope that there will be a more learning by the Secretary of Defense HECFES, even to mention about even 1 to 2, 3 countries, the name of the ASEAN during the confirmation hearing. But again, that it creates a very important division of labor way of engaging in the Philippines, while the United States, offered Article 4 commitments in the benchmark wider sense in the guarantee of the defense on the Philippines. At the same time, Japan and Korea can actually cooperate, especially in low and medium ends of the level of the risk planning, especially by enhancing their policing capability, maritime law enforcement capability for strengthening their coast guards and so on. So that those kind of a layered cooperation really address to what they need for the escalation management towards the future. So that really is the fundamental issue. Whoever becomes the leadership in the government, that kind of coordination among those allies and partnership does play into the law, whether or not you call it as a lattice works or network security. That I think at the destination that we need to have remains to be there. So I hope that Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz, Elbridge Colby understand this notion, but how much that as a White House as a whole is ready to spend their time and resources in continuously playing its very important role in the Summit 2+2 ministerial meetings and the military exercises, and which is costly for the President Trump calculation, but it is the physical demonstration of the commitment by the United States. So this needs to be, I think, emphasized by the joint voices created by our 3 countries. And finally, on your question about NATO minilateralism, I think here is many of the role of the voicing out, and also to coordinate the physical coordination between two regions, because as Ambassador Mizushima mentioned, that it was the former Prime Minister Kishida's saying that today's Ukraine will be the tomorrow's maybe the tomorrow's East Asia, and which has a lot of connotation. I mean that what's going to take place, especially for the early 6 months of the agenda by the Trump administration, is how to bring in the peace in Ukraine. But I think that if there is the kind of ceasefire agreement, which creates the undesirable result for the future of Ukraine and European security, that might matter for their future and that might matter for the East Asia. So that we do have the lot of logic, and I think that legitimate voices to bring in what kind of law and order should take place when the ceasefire agreements could take place in Ukraine, and vice versa. There would be a European preferences, what kind of status quo that we are trying to maintain in Asia that might also matter for the Europe. In that context, that the Japan, Korea, and Australia have, I think, a larger role to play in the connection of those contexts.
Professor Wilkinson, yeah, I agree. I used to say Japan is not just simple middle power, it's super middle power, maybe. Okay. You talked a lot about security angle, especially the Australia's contribution to the maritime security cooperation in this Indo-Pacific region. But can I help ask this question? President Trump used to say Taiwan is just a small island that Americans shouldn't bother, right, that much. And do you expect his administration is going to care about the Taiwan security? Because all this maritime cooperation surrounding the South China Sea is related to the Taiwan in order to keep the status quo in that area. So if we have a lukewarm, even negative response from the Trump administration on this sea and also Taiwan, how much we can do this maritime cooperation among us without U.S. engagement that much? And second one, you talked about the kind of creating more durable the middle power, the Korea, Australia, and Japan cooperation for the security in this region. Then, from which platforms we should start, or should we aim to create the new one? And how do you see the leadership of Australia in these endeavors, in these efforts?
Thank you, Professor Lee. Okay, so in terms of Taiwan, well, Australia has been a little bit ambiguous in terms of whether it would provide support to the United States if it was involved in a Taiwan Strait conflict, or the nature that support might involve. It's a little controversial subject back in domestic politics. This raised questions over the purpose to which AUKUS submarines, when they finally arrive, would actually be used. Would they potentially be used in such a contingency? And the government has been emphatic that it would, retain the option on that, so to speak. But the problem is, I think if there's a conflict in the Taiwan Strait, I well, firstly, I can't see the United States walking away from it, partly because the whole idea of supporting this embattled democracy, and the fact that this is a really important strategic link, or in terms of the geopolitics of the region. If Taiwan were taken over one way or another by the Beijing government, then Japan's security would be exposed, or would become more vulnerable. US bases in Japan would become more tenuous. So I don't want to make a call on what would happen, but I think that there's a certain dynamic all of its own in terms of how US allies would respond to calls for support from the United States in the event of a crisis or a conflict in Taiwan. But I think it's not just about Taiwan. I think there's a number of other issues that US allies are expected to support the United States in the South China Sea. Of course, Japan worries about the East China Sea as well, and not least North Korea. Perhaps one of the difficulties for trilateral cooperation and those three countries' cooperation with the United States is a differing level of intensity in threat perceptions. So obviously in the case of Australia, Japan, Korea trilateralism, then South Korea worries a lot more about North Korea, perhaps as a proximate and pressing threat than Australia does. We're a little bit insulated about that. It's also important for Japan. Maybe we're more concerned about South China Sea and Taiwan, but again, that's important for Japan as well. So reconciling those diverging threat perceptions amongst the three of us and the United States, and then let alone the cross-regional linkage, I think is one of the biggest challenges. The main thing for just to say a quick word on Trump about his interactions with allies. There's at a certain level, it's transactional, and the thing that he seems to care about the most is whether allies are paying up, whether they're contributing enough in terms of the defense burden. And I think we're all actually, the three allies are all in a good position for that. Maybe, in light of his first administration, actually just producing a data set on how the United States under Trump might particularly view allies in terms of the contributions that they make, and with their defense budgets being a key factor, but their willingness to host American bases or participate in American coalition operations also being factors. And we were gratified to find out that Australia probably comes about number one in the ranking in terms of its sort of, if not its value to the United States, at least its ability to say, yes, we're doing everything we possibly can. In terms of the structuring of minilateral cooperation, there's a number of ways that this could be done. An Australia, Japan, Korea trilateral, minilateral formation. When you start to look at these things like the Quad, AUKUS, US, Japan, Australia, trilateral strategic dialogue, you start to see some patterns amongst these minilaterals that we will probably wittingly or unwittingly begin to emulate. So you tend to have things like 2+2 foreign and defense ministers meetings, leaders summits, albeit not necessarily regularized, setting up of working groups, and various things that maybe sort of undergird the sort of the trilateral formation as a whole, like reciprocal access agreements, acquisition and cross-servicing agreements, things that sort of are the modalities for facilitating concrete cooperation. So I think this is an important area for study to see what has been done, what is being done, and what might be done in terms of accreting some tangible structure and therefore some some concrete outputs for trilateralism.
Thank you. Because next session starts from 11:20, Maybe if we are allowed, let's spend 5 minutes to take questions from the floor. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. And then, identify yourself and, whether you are asking specific speaker, just, go ahead.
트럼프가 오면서 그냥 간단하게 트럼프 대통령이 오면서 관세와 시작해서 이제 남중국 계획, 중국이랑 대만이랑 전쟁 만약에 일어나게 되면 이게 식량 안보에도 지대한 영향을 미치고 그렇게 되면 세계 국가가 어떻게 식량 안보를 어떻게 하면 더 좋은 방향으로 할 수 있는지 거기에 대해서 궁금합니다.
네, 알겠습니다. Okay, let me take other questions from the floor.
Hello everyone, my name is Eren Yildirim. I'm a PhD student in Seoul University, Political Science and International Relations. And I'm not going to specifically ask my question any of these professors, but anyone can answer, I think. As we mentioned that all of those minilaterals or trilateral relations are based on the values, free and open trade and democracy, human rights. Do you think that Republic of Korea, Japan and Australia can put any leverage on United States if they can go against those values? So they can create such kind of pressures on United States, do you believe, especially for the next term? Thank you so much.
And then maybe one more question from the floor. If not, the first question is about the impact on the food security, and if there is some conflict in the region. So it's difficult to answer, but if you can. And the second one, of course, about this value questions. Values become a dirty word in Trump leadership, but it's very important. So, okay, Professor Wilkinson.
I'm happy to take the values question. That's a really interesting point. I mean, typically when you look at different forms of security alignment, whether it's an alliance or whether it's a strategic partnership or a minilateral, they will almost inevitably characterize themselves as countries with shared values and interests. Now, where values begin and interests end and vice versa, they're often a bit of a compound. So I would say that sometimes you could view these things as just cloaking your strategic interests in values to sort of make it seem more benign and more of a public good. But in some ways, the values are interests for our countries and for the United States. And that is where it sort of crystallizes on things like the free and open Indo-Pacific. Like this is the kind of the structure of the regional order that the United States and its allies want to affect, respect for international law, freedom from coercion, free and fair trade, all these kind of things. So those are interests as well. So whether or not the United States maybe walk away from the rhetoric or the tenor of those values under Trump, like those values as interests for the United States aren't really going to change. I can't see the free and open Indo-Pacific being abandoned in substance, even if it isn't sort of articulated with such enthusiasm. So there's two sides to the regional to building the regional order: the strategic balance, but also the so-called rules element, and that's critical for our three countries because we don't have the power to live in a world or a region where might makes right. We need adherence to those norms to kind of socialize the region. So I think it will remain very important, even if it's not perhaps Trump's personal interest.
Okay, Professor Chan, any saying about this? I don't know why people see the contradiction between values and interests, but what's your philosophical thinking about this? Professor Jimbo.
Well, I'm pretty much interested in hearing from you, but I think when Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, it was Japan, Australia, Korea, plus Singapore that created the so-called Asia-Pacific Street or four countries to support the war against Russia. And that has, I think, created the effectiveness of the issue in Europe to be globalized. And I think we created the trigger. And that is based on the value what we believe. And that has to be based on the rules, especially in the UN Charter. And without the rules, and especially the interests of the middle powers will be violated. In the context that we have lots of ground for promoting this order. And the leverage that we have is that I think we will have the better position to create the rules for the 21st century as exemplified by the CPTPP negotiations. And then we are more, I think, skillful in engaging the global south, especially in the economic and societal way that we really have an innovative way to approach this. This is the way that the United States may want to learn in the future.
That's very excellent words to wrap this session. And for the interest of time, I have to conclude this session. And this is really important, and we have to continue this kind of dialogue to the future. And let's applause to the great three speakers. Thank you very much.